Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're jumping into one of America's most persistent mysteries.
Mm,
What happened to Jimmy Hoffa? It's a name so many people know, but the actual facts of his disappearance, often a total mystery, really the ultimate cold case.
absolutely. And that's what we're digging into. We're using your sources here, this really interesting YouTube transcript, journalistic report, official documents, to pull out the key insights on this, well, incredibly complex situation.
Yeah.
Our goal is to piece together his life, those powerful, murky connections, the day he actually vanished, and then walk through the main theories about what might have happened.
So, looking at the material you've brought together, what can this specific case, with all these powerful people, secret deals, what can it tell you about how influence really works? And how fast things like loyalty, even lives, can change when ambition takes over.
Well, to get there, we have to start with Hoffa himself,
Right.
James Hoffa.
Right. A huge figure. President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, was it 58 to 71?
That's right, 1958 to 1971, a long time. And the Teamsters, they started out as a union for drivers, pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
But under Hoffa, they grew to control something like 90% of all U.S. transportation. It's staggering, really.
Wow.
And his own start was impressive. He organized a strike when he was just 18, got dock workers better pay, and he just shot up through the Teamster ranks after that.
So he had genuine organizing talent early on.
Definitely. And it's key to remember, whatever happened later, Hoffa was genuinely beloved by many union workers. He consistently got them better benefits, better wages. He delivered.
Which builds loyalty, even if the methods get questionable later.
Exactly. It shows how delivering tangible results can create that strong bond,
But things took a darker turn, didn't they? Around 1941 in Detroit.
Yeah, that seems to be the pivotal moment during a turf war. That's when his first documented involvement with the mob happened.
And according to author Dan Moldea, Hoffa actually hired Mafia guys to take out rivals.
Right. And Moldea's take is that while it worked for Hoffa in the short term, it meant the Mafia essentially owned him from then on.
So deal with the devil, basically.
You could say that.
Mm.
And what grew out of it was this symbiotic relationship. The mob got access to loans from the Teamsters' huge pension fund.
Ah, the pension fund. That comes up a lot.
It does. They use that money to finance Las Vegas casinos, among other things. And in return, Hoffa and the Teamsters got favorable returns on those loans. It was powerful, worked for both sides, but incredibly dangerous.
It really blurs the lines, doesn't it, between legitimate union power and organized crime.
Completely. It creates this system where everyone's kind of compromised by these hidden deals.
But this alliance, this powerful connection, it started to fray, especially after Hoffa went to prison.
Yeah, in 1967, he got a 13-year sentence for bribery, jury tampering, mail fraud, a whole list of things.
Okay.
Then fast forward to 1971, President Nixon pardons him.
Nixon, right. But there was a catch, wasn't there?
A big one. The condition was Hoffa had to stay completely out of any union activities until 1980.
Mm.
And that pardon, weirdly enough, seems to have set the stage for his eventual downfall. It's kind of ironic.
How so? What happened next?
Well, jump to July 1975, things get really tense. Federal investigators find out that hundreds of billions of dollars are missing,
Yeah.
gone, from the Teamsters' biggest pension fund.
Hundreds of millions.
And get this, just 2 weeks after that discovery, Hoffa disappears.
Wow. Okay, that timing is more than coincidence, you'd think. What did the investigators make of that immediately?
Well, think about it. Hoffa's out of prison, but he's banned from the union. It stands to reason he might know where the bodies are buried, so to speak, regarding the pension fund and the mob's involvement.
He could talk?
Exactly. He could potentially expose the whole thing to investigators. And the Mafia absolutely would not want that.
Makes sense.
There's this internal FBI document, the Hoffa's memo from early '76. It basically says authorities suspected the mob killed Hoffa for exactly that reason. Fear he'd spilled the beans about them raiding the pension funds.
Okay.
Plus, the book I Heard You Paint Houses suggests the mob worried Hoffa might trade information about them to get his union ban lifted. And sources say Hoffa was also talking openly about wanting to kick the mob out of the Teamsters.
So he was becoming a major liability for them on multiple fronts.
Precisely. A very dangerous position to be in.
Okay, let's zero in on the day itself. July 30th, 1975. What do we know happened?
Hoffa, he's 62 at this point. He's seen outside the Marcus Red Fox restaurants in a Detroit suburb. He's supposedly there for a 2.0 p.m. meeting.
With who?
2 Mafia figures. Anthony Giacalone, known as Tony Jack, and Anthony Provenzano, Tony Pro. Provenzano was also a Teamster official, remember?
Okay, so 2 key guys. Did they show up?
Nope, neither of them. And when the FBI asked them later, both Giacolone and Provenzano insisted no meeting was ever even planned.
Huh. Convenient. What were their alibis?
That's where it gets suspicious. They were described as rock solid, almost too solid. Giacolone was apparently at an athletic club nearby, making a big show of chatting with everyone.
Like he was deliberately creating witnesses.
Investigators thought so, yeah.
Yeah.
And Provenzano, he was way over in New Jersey, playing cards with his brother all afternoon.
So geographically impossible for him to be there.
Right. Investigators found those alibis maybe a little too perfect, you know.
Okay, so the meeting doesn't happen. What does Hoffa do?
Around 2:30 p.m., he calls his wife, Josephine, from a payphone nearby. Tells her he's been stood up.
And people saw him waiting.
Yes, crucially. 5 different witnesses told investigators they saw Hoffa hanging around the restaurant parking lot that afternoon.
And then? The last sighting?
Other witnesses reported seeing a burgundy Mercury Marquis pull up. 3 men inside. They saw Hoffa get into that car.
And that was likely it.
It stands to reason that Hoffa getting into that car was the last time anyone saw him alive. The next morning, his own car was found, still sitting in the restaurant parking lot.
The Mercury Marquis, that car becomes important.
Hugely important. Years later, forensic technology advanced, and they found a hair in that car. DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Jimmy Hoffa.
Wow, so that puts him in that specific car.
It makes it very plausible, maybe even likely, that the Mercury Marquis was the vehicle used to take him wherever he was ultimately killed.
Who was driving it? Do we know?
The main suspect for driving the car was Charles Chucky O'Brien.
Chucky O'Brien. Wasn't he close to Hoffa?
Very close. Described as like a surrogate son, a protege. Which is significant, because Hoffa probably wouldn't have just jumped into a car, especially if he felt things were tense, unless he trusted someone inside.
And O'Brien would be someone he trusted.
He would have been, yes, one of them.
Did O'Brien admit to being there? Or driving the car?
No, he always denied it. Denied Hoffa ever got in that car while he was driving, denied any involvement at all.
But investigators looked closely at him, didn't they? What did they find?
They did scrutinize him. There were reports their relationship, Hoffa and O'Brien's, had gotten strained. O'Brien apparently felt Hoffa hadn't done enough to help his career within the Teamsters.
Okay, so maybe some resentment there.
Possibly. And Hoffa's own daughter, Barbara, was very direct. She said O'Brien was driving the car near the Red Fox when her father disappeared. Her logic was, if her dad's hair was in that car, O'Brien had to be there.
Hard to argue with that. What else?
Investigators noted the car had been cleaned, like very recently before they got to examine it.
Cleaned? Why?
O'Brien's explanation was pretty strange. He claimed he'd been transporting a big 40-pound package of salmon, and it spilled fish blood in the back seat, so he had to clean it.
Salmon. That sounds fishy. Sorry.
Small chuck.
All right.
Yeah, it struck investigators as odd, too. Then, police dogs, German shepherds trained for scent detection, picked up Hoffa's scent in the back seat and the trunk of that car.
In the trunk, too. Okay, that's damning.
One last thing. Hoffa's son, James P. Hoffa, said that when he directly asked O'Brien about his involvement later on, O'Brien just got up and quickly left the room. Didn't answer.
So a lot of suspicious circumstances around O'Brien and that car.
A lot, yes. But never enough for charges related to the disappearance itself.
And despite all this, despite decades of searching, no body.
Never found. The general consensus, pretty much undisputed, is that Hoffa was killed by the Mafia somehow, somewhere. But the how, the who exactly, the where, still a mystery.
What happened with the official investigation? Did it just hit a dead end?
Pretty much. That Hoffa's memo showed early suspicion pointed towards the mob. Then, about 4 months in, this inmate, Ralph Picardo, claimed he had info from one of the killers.
Okay. Did that lead anywhere?
It led the FBI to a list of suspects, most of them connected to Tony Provenzano, one of the guys Hoffa was supposed to meet.
Back to Provenzano.
Right. But the problem was, every single one of those suspects eventually pleaded the Fifth Amendment, refused to testify.
So, no indictment, no trial.
Exactly. Hopes were dashed. The case essentially went cold after that.
And where does it stand now? Still cold.
As of 2015, yeah, it was considered inactive. There have been thousands of tips over the years, digs in various locations. Nothing panned out. Hoffa's daughter, Barbara, she said she doubts it'll ever be solved now. Most of the key players, the main suspects, they're dead.
And legally, Hoffa himself.
He was officially declared dead back in 1982, 7 years after he vanished.
Okay, so with the official investigation stalled, we're left with theories. And there are some wild ones, but some compelling ones too, right?
Definitely. Let's walk through the main ones based on the sources. Theory 1 points the finger at Salvatore Briguglio, another mob figure connected to Provenzano.
Briguglio, what's the theory there?
This comes largely from author Dan Moldea, who actually interviewed Briguglio. Moldea believes Briguglio killed Hoffa at a place called Roland McMaster's horse farm.
Okay. And then what happened to the body, according to this theory?
Put into a 55-gallon drum, loaded onto a truck belonging to Gateway Transportation, and shipped off to a Mafia-controlled landfill in New Jersey.
A Gateway Transportation truck. Why is that significant?
Because the president of Gateway Transportation was also, guess what, a trustee for the Teamsters pension fund.
Wow. It just shows the network, doesn't it? How they could use legitimate-seeming businesses, union connections to cover their tracks.
Exactly. The whole network could be mobilized.
Okay, theory number 2 brings us back to Tony Provenzano directly.
Right. Federal investigators theorized early on that Provenzano ordered the hit. The backstory is that he and Hoffa were imprisoned together for a time in Pennsylvania.
And they didn't get along.
That's putting it mildly. They apparently came to despise each other. Deep hatred there. Hoffa's son also believed Provenzano was manipulating Hoffa's successor, Frank Fitzsimmons.
Adding fuel to the fire.
And Hoffa himself, back in 1974, reported a direct threat from Provenzano. Said Tony Pros swore he'd kidnap Hoffa's grandkids, or, quote, pull his guts out if Hoffa tried to get the Teamster presidency back.
Chilling. So clear motive and documented threats there.
Very clear. Now, theory 3 involves a really notorious figure. Richard Kuklinski.
The Iceman. The contract killer.
That's him. While in prison, Kuklinski told author Philip Carlo that he killed Hoffa. Said he was paid $40,000 by the mob, specifically on orders from the big boss, Russell Bufalino.
And what was Kuklinski's story of how it happened?
He claimed he drove to Detroit with 4 other guys. They picked Hoffa up, knocked him out, and Kuklinski stabbed him with a hunting knife in the skull.
Gruesome. And the body.
Transported back to Jersey in a car trunk. Kuklinski claimed the car, with the body still inside, was then crushed into a scrap metal cube and shipped off. His infamous quote was, "He's part of a car somewhere in Japan right now."
That's macabre. Is Kuklinski credible, though? He was known for boasting, wasn't he?
That's the debate. One police officer involved in his case believed him, but many others called him a massive liar, an exaggerator. One former FBI agent called the Kuklinski claim the most embarrassing one to date. So big grain of salt needed there.
Okay, on to theory 4. This one involves Frank Sheeran, the Irishman.
Yes, and this theory gained a lot of attention, especially after the movie. Sheeran, another mob hitman, confessed on his deathbed, basically, to author Charles Brandt.
And he claimed he killed Hoffa.
He did. Said he shot him. The big irony here is that Hoffa had actually hired Sheeran years earlier to be his muscle, his enforcer.
Wow. Talk about biting the hand that fed you. What was Sheeran's account?
He said they picked Hoffa up, drove him to an empty house in Detroit. As Hoffa walked inside, Sheeran shot him twice in the back of the head.
Just like that.
Just like that. Then he claimed the body was taken to a mob-connected funeral home and cremated immediately. No trace left.
Why did Sheeran say he did it? Did he give a reason beyond just orders?
He said he felt immense guilt, but he believed he'd be killed himself if he refused the order from, again, Russell Bufalino. He also mentioned this strange detail. He deliberately sat in the front passenger seat when they picked Hoffa up. Hoffa apparently always sat there. Sheeran claimed it was meant as a subtle secret warning sign to Hoffa that something was very wrong.
Did this theory have any legs, any corroboration?
Well, Hoffa's son said he believed his father would have gotten into a car if Frank Sheeran was in it, because they were close friends for years. And the FBI did confirm Sheeran was definitely in the Detroit area that day. But investigators searched the house Sheeran named. They used luminol, looked for blood evidence, found nothing. So apart from Sheeran's word, given when he was dying, there's no physical evidence to back it up.
Maybe just clearing his conscience, like he claimed? He was apparently quite religious later in life.
That's certainly plausible. His strong Catholic faith might have motivated a deathbed confession, true or not.
Now, you mentioned Russell Bufalino in connection with both Kuklinski's and Sheeran's stories. And this is where it gets even more tangled, involving Nixon.
This is where it gets really interesting, yeah. Connecting Sheeran's confession to Bufalino opens up this whole other layer involving President Nixon.
Okay, lay it out for us.
A PBS investigation, plus Nixon's own White House tapes, revealed something pretty stunning. Hoffa's successor as Teamsters president, Frank Fitzsimmons, who had mob ties, apparently worked with President Nixon on Hoffa's pardon.
Worked with him how?
It seems Fitzsimmons wanted Hoffa pardoned, out of prison, maybe to appease some union members, but he also needed that condition attached to the ban from union activity until 1980, so Hoffa couldn't immediately come back and challenge him for leadership.
So Fitzsimmons gets what he wants. What was in it for Nixon?
The tapes suggest Nixon and his Attorney General, John Mitchell, thought pardoning Hoffa would appeal to working-class voters. Mitchell's quote was something like, Hoffa's, quote, just a tough, beer-drinking, no-good son of a bitch like most of them are. A very cynical political calculation.
Okay, so this suggests potential collusion between the president and mob-connected union figures. Serious collusion. And it gets deeper. Documents found at Wayne State University's labor archives indicate that people associated with Tony Provenzano's mob crew sent huge amounts of money, like $500,000 initially, maybe up to $1 million total, to Charles Colson, Nixon's special counsel.
$1 million? For what?
For the restricted pardon, essentially buying Hoffa's conditional release. And remember, this is happening right around the time of the Watergate scandal.
Oh.
There's even an unconfirmed suggestion in a Department of Justice memo that this money might have been intended to help cover up Watergate expenses.
Wait, so the implication is the Mafia basically paid off the President of the United States for a pardon and maybe even inadvertently helped fund the Watergate cover-up.
That's the explosive implication. Think about that. The Mafia just purchased the President of the United States for $1 million. It's mind-boggling.
Absolutely staggering, and Hoffa might have known about this or suspected it. It's theorized he did. And if he knew, or even strongly suspected, that the mob had essentially bought his pardon from Nixon and was planning to go public with it, well, that would make someone like Russell Bufalino extremely nervous.
Bufalino again. Why him specifically?
Around the same time, 1975, Time magazine published an article linking Bufalino to CIA operations involving the mob in Cuba.
Okay.
According to journalist Matt Birkbeck, this article shattered Bufalino's carefully maintained anonymity. He was furious and became obsessed with silencing anyone who could expose him further.
And Hoffa could have been one of those people.
Potentially a major one. Bufalino reportedly heard that Hoffa, along with two other mobsters, Sam Giancana and John Roselli, were planning to testify before the Church Committee.
The Church Committee, they were investigating CIA abuses, right?
Exactly, investigating CIA and FBI activities. If Hoffa, Giancana, and Roselli talked, they could potentially blow the lid off mob CIA connections, maybe even the Nixon pardon deal.
And what happened to Giancana and Roselli?
Well, shortly after Bufalino supposedly heard about their plans to talk, Giancana was shot dead in his home. Roselli's dismembered body was found floating in a drum off the Florida coast, and Hoffa disappeared.
Wow. Giancana, Roselli, Hoffa, all silenced within a short period after potentially talking to that committee. That paints a very dark picture.
It does. It connects Hoffa's disappearance not just to internal Teamster or mob politics, but potentially to national security secrets and presidential corruption. A very powerful motive for Bufalino to want him gone permanently.
Okay, that's a heavy one. Are there any lighter theories?
Well, there's the fifth theory, which is basically that Hoffa is still alive somewhere.
Still alive after all this time.
It mainly persists because the body was never found. There's a sort of bleak version where he's still being held by the mob somewhere, which seems unlikely.
And the happier version.
The happier version, which is pure speculation, internet forum kind of stuff, is that he faked the whole thing and ran off to South America, maybe with a go-go dancer.
Teckles. Okay, that one feels a bit like wishful thinking.
Definitely more in the realm of folklore than serious investigation. But, without a body, theories like that will always pop up. As we said, though, legally, he was declared dead in '82.
So summing it all up, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa remains this incredibly tangled, frustrating mystery. Decades of investigations, countless theories, but the actual, confirmed truth, still out of reach. The case is unsolved.
It really is. And if there's one core lesson to take from this whole saga, it's probably about the immense danger of getting mixed up with organized crime. Hoffa played that game, used it for power, but in the end, it seems it consumed him. The lines get blurred, loyalties mean nothing, and the potential cost is, well, ultimate.
Absolutely. So as you think about this story, weaving together union power, mafia influence, maybe even presidential politics, all from the sources you've provided, what does it tell you about power and compromise in America? Could we ever actually find out the full truth? Or are some secrets just buried too deep, tied to too many powerful interests to ever really come to light? Makes you wonder.